21 black R&B legends who were actually mentally ill. Beneath the dazzling stage lights, rhythm and blues rescued an entire generation. Yet, the very powerhouses who forged this musical salvation could not rescue themselves. Behind the golden illusion of fame, R&B's most iconic figures were fighting an invisible punishment, a brutal, silent war against mental decay. Picture a legend commanding the president's stage, only to be found wandering the streets, gasping for air as he screamed for a ghost. Or a beloved crooner bound to a chair, convinced demons poisoned his veins. These aren't tabloid fodder. They are earth-shattering secrets buried by an unforgiving industry. 21 icons. 21 untold descents into raw agony. Brace yourself as we shatter the illusion. Sam Cooke. The tragedy of this soulful powerhouse didn't begin on the cold tile floor of a cheap Los Angeles motel. It started quietly in the deepest corners of his mind. Cooke was the ultimate icon, standing under the dazzling stage lights, mesmerizing audiences at the White House and making even Elvis Presley nervous. But behind this golden illusion, an earth-shattering secret was festering. The tragic drowning of his 3-year-old son became a silent predator, gnawing away at his sanity and leaving an unfillable void. Soon, his picture-perfect family life collapsed, and a chilling speculation began to surround his erratic behavior. He was wandering aimlessly at night, speaking in incoherent riddles, and convinced shadowy assassins were hunting him. His management ignored the raw agony, prioritizing the lucrative star over the deteriorating man. On December 11, 1964, the illusion shattered completely. He burst into a motel, nearly naked and screaming for a non-existent woman, his eyes bulging with terror as he conversed with an invisible phantom. The manager, paralyzed by fear, fired 3 fatal shots. Officially, it was ruled self-defense, but the truth is far more sinister. The systemic blade of an industry that treats mental health as a public disgrace had already sealed his fate. He had surrendered to the ghosts in his head long before the bullets pierced his chest. Yet, as the echoes of those gunshots fade into the abyss, they awaken the restless spirit of another hidden genius who willingly traded his reality for a microphone connected to the underworld. Don Covey. If the dented microphone in that Chicago booth could speak, it would testify to a madness the dazzling stage lights never illuminated. It felt the tremor in his sweating hands, absorbing the desperate breaths of a genius who penned anthems for powerhouse artists while quietly fighting an invisible enemy. The microphone became his sole confidant when the sudden drop arrived. After his sister's tragic death, Covey's grief mutated into an earth-shattering secret, a severe depression driving him far away from the forgiving spotlight and into the suffocating grip of acute paranoia. He would sit for hours in the dark, clutching the cold metal, whispering into the dead mic to establish a frantic hotline to the afterlife. "It's back," he trembled one night in 1981, his mind entirely collapsing under fame's crushing pressure. Professionals diagnosed his raw agony, trapping him in a psychiatric ward, but he swiftly escaped, condemning the outside world as the truly crazy ones. He wasn't entirely wrong. He was a fragile soul unable to survive a ruthless machine. Now that abandoned microphone stands cold and silent, forever waiting for a voice that chose the comfort of ghosts over the applause of men. Sometimes, evaporating completely from a toxic world becomes the ultimate survival strategy, forcing a legendary figure to bury their own identity just to find peace in absolute obscurity. Levern Baker. The entertainment machine is a merciless meat grinder disguised as a dream factory, treating its brightest stars as disposable pawns controlled by ruthless giants. Levern Baker was the powerhouse who forced a segregated nation to listen. But beneath the dazzling stage lights, she was subjected to the systemic blade of the industry. Exploitative contracts, racial prejudices, and fame's crushing pressure built invisible walls around her. She endured an invisible punishment daily just to maintain the golden illusion of success. The sudden drop arrived in 1969. After 2 years of dedicating her life to a major project, executives casually tossed her aside. The illusion shattered. Neighbors listened to hours of raw agony as she locked her door, screaming and smashing her own records to pieces. Then she vanished. To escape becoming tabloid fodder, she fled to a military base in the Philippines, living in total anonymity for 2 decades. When an American officer recognized her iconic voice, she offered a chilling speculation: "I used to be that person, but I can't be that person anymore." Decades later, a merciless foe in the form of diabetes claimed both her legs. She returned to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in a wheelchair, smiling quietly while hiding an unfillable void. To survive the vicious game of fame, she had to erase her own existence. Fleeing across oceans could not salvage a spirit broken by the industry's cruel machinery, yet remaining locked entirely within the borders of one's own home offered absolutely no sanctuary from a mind aggressively fracturing under its own paranoid weight. Billy Wright. Billy Wright was a glamorous pioneer whose flamboyant stage presence paved the way for legends like Little Richard. But beneath the heavy makeup and dazzling stage lights, a psychological ghost was violently tearing his reality apart. His tragedy wasn't a sudden accident. It was the terrifying culmination of a silent predator nesting deep within his mind. The terror of maintaining a picture-perfect facade while hiding an earth-shattering secret about his sexuality, coupled with family rejection, birthed a merciless foe. He couldn't trust anyone. Friends endured his chilling speculation as Billy frantically searched his home for hidden microphones, absolutely convinced the walls were recording him. He abruptly canceled tours, severing all contact to hide from this invisible enemy. This wasn't merely fame's crushing pressure, it was pure raw agony. For 15 years he endured a self-inflicted invisible punishment, locked inside a paranoid prison where any visitor was a perceived traitor. Begging for just one person to trust on his deathbed, he proved to be a man destroyed from the inside out. His fragmented soul had tragically perished decades before his physical body finally flatlined. The agonizing obsession with imagined surveillance seamlessly bleeds into a profound, suffocating isolation, paving a desolate path for another forgotten talent whose only remaining companion was the desperate hum of a radio in the pitch black. Nolan Porter. I still remember the suffocating smell of that pitch-black living room the night we found him. As a paramedic, you see tragedy, but the raw agony radiating from Nolan was palpable. I stood there, shining my flashlight over scattered, incoherent notes, witnessing the sudden drop of a man whose melodies once inspired generations. He was severely dehydrated, skeletal, practically skin over bones, clutching a cassette player like a lifeline. He looked through me, eyes hollowed out, whispering a chilling speculation, "They're listening to me through the light." The golden illusion of his career was stripped away by the systemic blade of financial ruin. I felt a deep ache loading him onto the stretcher. Fame's crushing pressure had morphed into an invisible enemy. At the facility he asked only for a radio, using sound to plug an unfillable void. He later said, "The stage is bright but I live better in the dark." That night, I didn't just treat a patient. I witnessed the final flicker of a brilliant filament before the spotlight shattered into eternal silence. That haunting descent into self-imposed darkness sharply contrasts with those who fought desperately to remain illuminated, only to have their fragile biology stage a catastrophic rebellion mid-song. Linda Jones. She passed away at just 27 years old, leaving behind a shaky handwritten note on the lyrics to Hypnotized that simply read, "I'm ready to sleep." Her final New Jersey performance wasn't a triumph. She sat motionless, eyes distant, an empty shell long before her heart finally stopped. Yet, rewind just a few years and she was the ultimate powerhouse. Bursting onto the scene at 19, her voice was a golden illusion, singing with a spiritual depth that spoke for an entire marginalized community. Beneath the dazzling stage lights, however, hid an earth-shattering secret. Severe type 1 diabetes was violently ravaging her body. The systemic blade of a ruthless touring schedule completely ignored her raw agony. While audiences applauded, she was quietly wasting away, plunging into diabetic comas and suffering terrifying mood swings. One night, a silent predator drove her to call her mother at 2 a.m., sobbing just to ask, "Do you still recognize me?" The music machine simply labeled her sudden drop as medical complications, willfully ignoring fame's crushing pressure. Ultimately, physical glory is terrifyingly fragile, proving that even the brightest flame is extinguished the moment the curtain falls. The tragic failure of an exhausted physical vessel swiftly gives way to a completely different type of organic betrayal, where an aggressive cellular invader morphs the purest pitch into a frantic hostage of its own terrified mind. Minnie Riperton. One unrivaled whistle note. That was all it took to cement her golden illusion at the absolute top of the charts. But the chilling math of her sudden drop is far more devastating. At exactly 31 years old, a devastating diagnosis of breast cancer introduced a physical, merciless foe into her body, but it was the 4 uninterrupted hours she spent locked inside her car crying that revealed the true, invisible enemy. She wasn't just hiding from the paparazzi, she was terrified of her own mind. The statistics of her raw agony were staggering. Countless sleepless hours staring at the ceiling until dawn with a heavy heart, one recording session abruptly halted because she heard the voices of the dead, and daily diary entries detailing a chilling speculation of a white room, incessant knocking, and phantom arms grabbing her from behind. Doctors added 2 clinical labels to her medical chart: panic disorder and severe depression. Yet, she firmly rejected therapy, calculating that she needed to endure the unfillable void just to sing her final high note with a perfectly clear mind. At precisely 31 years of age, she passed away, her daughter noting that in her final moments, she stared silently at the ceiling, listening to a frequency no one else could hear. One pristine voice traded for a fatal equation of fame and fear. The sheer exhaustion of a mind desperately fighting its own failing biology seamlessly paves the way for a completely different kind of ruin, where absolute financial devastation strips away not just wealth, but a man's entire grip on his own identity. Major Lance. Examine the bleak contents of a shabby Atlanta apartment in 1987. No television, no phone, no bed, just a solitary wooden chair and an old voicemail playing on an agonizing endless loop. This tiny auditory relic was the final anchor for a man who had entirely lost his grip on reality. Decades earlier, his radiant smile and powerhouse vocals spearheaded the Chicago soul movement. He was the epitome of a picture-perfect icon, a master of the golden illusion. Yet, the systemic blade of the music industry is ruthlessly efficient. When the crowds moved on and record labels turned their backs, the sudden drop was absolute. Bankrupt and rejected, he still sprayed cologne and wore tailored suits to meetings that never happened, desperately trying to mend the illusion shattered long ago. Stripped of his dazzling stage lights, an invisible enemy eroded his sanity. The raw agony became horrifyingly clear at a charity event where, completely forgetting his lyrics, he stared into the audience and whispered, "Who was I?" He spent his final years rehearsing stage banter with phantoms on his front porch, crushed under an unfillable void. The cold truth remains, he didn't die of physical illness, but of a complete psychological erasure. An identity violently wiped clean by abandonment creates a haunting vacuum, yet a mind stubbornly refusing to let go of a profoundly shattered past traps another wandering soul in an agonizing, waking purgatory. Howard Tate. A fatal car crash in 1976 wasn't just a physical collision. It was the exact moment a merciless foe violently severed his connection to reality. Before that single devastating phone call, he was a deep soul powerhouse whose golden illusion commanded profound respect from industry giants. But the sudden drop was instantaneous. The horrific news of his daughter's death struck him mid-recording, and the illusion shattered permanently. One catastrophic event initiated decades of raw agony, transforming him into a broken ghost wandering between two worlds. He abandoned the dazzling stage lights, disappearing into the invisible punishment of homelessness. He was found shivering barefoot under an overpass, or riding aimlessly in a taxi for hours, gripped by chilling speculation, desperately searching for the exact spot his daughter used to sit. When a fan eventually recognized his hollowed face, his answer was a devastating echo of an unfillable void: "I used to be." Though a producer later coaxed him back to fulfill his daughter's last wish, his mind remained firmly trapped in the past. The agonizing truth is that a single stroke of fate can permanently extinguish a soul. Retreating entirely into the shadows to mourn an unspeakable loss provides a tragic sort of peace, whereas forcefully pasting a defiant grin over an actively hemorrhaging psyche constructs an agonizing, inescapable public prison. Millie Jackson. If social media existed in her era, her Instagram feed would be a flawless golden illusion of absolute empowerment. You would see the fiery powerhouse who fearlessly dominated the charts with albums like Caught Up, daringly breaking taboos about sex, men and politics with a dazzling, unapologetic smile. But the reality hidden from the public eye was nothing but terrifying tabloid fodder. The sudden drop happened not under the stage lights, but behind a strictly locked dressing room door. After a vicious radio broadcast labeled her rude and emotionally disturbed, the illusion shattered entirely. The show's director witnessed her raw agony, as she sobbed uncontrollably until she fell asleep out of sheer psychological exhaustion. She was constantly battling a merciless foe, mild bipolar disorder, that left her fiercely hugging her castmates and declaring her love one day, only to be consumed by a chilling speculation that they were plotting against her the very next morning. She faced the systemic blade of a rigid industry that canceled her television contracts due to uncontrollable behavior, subjecting her to the invisible punishment of forced psychiatric evaluations. Yet, she flatly refused treatment, terrified that silencing her chaotic emotions would create an unfillable void in her songwriting. She once famously declared, I'm not crazy, I'm just reacting to a crazy world, proving that the public truly knows absolutely nothing about the real humans behind the microphones. If you are still watching this countdown after 10 heartbreaking stories, it is because you recognize that society is often the true villain, demanding far too much from deeply fragile souls. And while one artist managed to barely survive her emotional firestorm by loudly confronting the chaos, another fiercely rebellious female pioneer was entirely consumed by her own mind, deliberately locking away her ferocious spirit to prevent the world from ever watching her bleed. Betty Mabry Davis. I remember knocking on that door, expecting the powerhouse who revolutionized funk. As a journalist, I idolized her dazzling stage lights and fiercely rebellious spirit. But when it creaked open, the golden illusion instantly evaporated. I stood face to face with pure raw agony. Disheveled, with eyes unbearably empty, she whispered a chilling speculation that froze my blood. I'm not Betty anymore. She's dead. The sudden drop from being Miles Davis's magnetic ex-wife to a shunned outcast was brutal. She suffered the systemic blade of an industry terrified of uncontrollable black women. Standing there, I profoundly felt her invisible punishment. Neighbors frequently heard her screaming at imaginary entities through the walls, actively battling a merciless foe later diagnosed as bipolar disorder. Rather than becoming cheap tabloid fodder, she permanently locked herself in the dark to preserve her remaining sanity. I watched a brilliant flame willingly extinguish itself forever. Choosing total isolation acts as a desperate shield for a fractured psyche, whereas plummeting directly in front of a screaming crowd violently twists a personal health tragedy into a horrifying theatrical display. Jackie Wilson. The crowd erupted in deafening applause as he collapsed mid-song, mistaking his catastrophic cardiac arrest for a dazzling theatrical performance. But the truth was a horrifying sudden drop. His heart literally stopped while singing Lonely Teardrops in 1975. Before this fatal moment, Jackie, Mr. Excitement, Wilson was the undeniable powerhouse who paved the way for Michael Jackson. However, his golden illusion masked years of untreated mental illness. He was slowly consumed by a merciless foe of intense paranoia. Driven by chilling speculation that recording equipment was actively stealing his mind, he frequently fired studio staff in fits of raw agony. He once sobbed uncontrollably backstage simply from hearing a baby cry. Despite desperately begging to step away to heal, the systemic blade of the industry forced him back under the spotlight. He was just a profitable asset they couldn't afford to lose. Surviving as a voiceless vegetable for 9 agonizing years, he ultimately passed away. Fame is a gilded cage where the brightest birds are sung to death. The horrifying public spectacle of a graceful icon falling to the floor often draws endless tears, whereas society instinctively recoils in absolute terror when a physically massive giant violently crumbles under a similar mental siege. Baby Huey. The sheer physical mass of the man, nearly 2 meters tall and over 150 kilograms, was a golden illusion of absolute invincibility. But inside this towering powerhouse, a silent predator was aggressively tearing his sanity apart. His tragedy wasn't the eventual fatal overdose. It was the psychological ghost of paranoia that hunted him down. Though poised for massive solo success under Curtis Mayfield, he was actively fighting a merciless foe. A chilling speculation hijacked his reality. He firmly believed the CIA had secretly wired his guitar amplifiers with tracking devices. The sudden drop manifested in terrifying mood swings. He would cheerfully laugh backstage, then violently smash mirrors out of pure raw agony, screaming that his thoughts were being monitored. He even halted a performance to roar at the audience, demanding to know if they saw him as a monster. Desperately trying to self-medicate this invisible punishment, he ingested dangerous narcotics to drown out the phantom voices. Discovered lifeless in a ravaged 1970 hotel room, his unblinking eyes stared at the ceiling, still conversing with an unseen entity. His deeply fragmented soul had permanently flatlined long before the lethal chemicals finally stopped his massive heart. Drowning internal demons in a sea of illicit narcotics ultimately replaces violent paranoia with a profound, terrifying numbness, deliberately erasing a singer's memory right in the middle of a live performance. O.V. Wright. He spent his final days locked in total isolation, arrested for drug possession, his mind so fractured he no longer knew right from wrong. He literally didn't realize he was dying. Yet, rewind to the 1960s and he was an absolute powerhouse. His sobbing voice was a golden illusion of profound emotional depth. The sudden drop arrived when narcotics became his merciless foe, unmasking his raw agony directly beneath the dazzling stage lights. Fans watched in horror as he performed with bloodshot eyes, once helplessly repeating the same lyric for 5 agonizing minutes. When urged to treat his invisible punishment, he screamed, "I'm not sick, I'm just sad." He didn't lose his voice, he lost his reality. Fading away under chemical numbness is a quiet tragedy, yet having your rightful crown brutally snatched away by trusted companions ignites an entirely different, ear-splitting inferno of betrayal. Florence Ballard. She was the foundational voice, the true powerhouse of the Supremes, yet the industry cruelly designated her as the disposable outsider. The golden illusion of absolute sisterhood was ruthlessly severed by the systemic blade of commercialism when Diana Ross was forcefully positioned center stage. This single, devastating career move triggered her immediate sudden drop into severe depression. Stripped of the dazzling stage lights, she was subjected to an invisible punishment of abject poverty and unbearable obscurity. The raw agony became horrifyingly public during a rare press conference where, paralyzed by a merciless foe of panic, she couldn't even correctly recall her own group's name. Neighbors frequently heard a chilling speculation echoing from her home in the dead of night as she desperately screamed, "I am the real voice of the group." Unsuccessful psychiatric treatments failed to plug her unfillable void, and she perished at just 32. If you violently tear a star from her rightful sky, you inevitably shatter her fragile mind. Being ruthlessly evicted from the spotlight leaves a lingering, desperate scream in the darkness, while the grueling pressure of remaining trapped inside it from early childhood forces another exhausted prodigy to chemically sever her own soul just to survive. Esther Phillips. She ultimately communicated only through hollow eye contact, completely stripped of the powerhouse voice that once commanded standing ovations. This was her sudden drop. Forced into the dazzling stage lights as a child, she utilized a merciless foe, severe addiction, to maintain the golden illusion. During one New York performance, the raw agony broke through. She stood entirely frozen before bursting into uncontrollable tears. Sent to a psychiatric ward by the systemic blade of the industry, she suffered the invisible punishment of using illegal narcotics just to forget her prescribed medications. True peace is rarely found in applause. Chemical silencing creates a hauntingly quiet finale, yet an adult mind shattering under the weight of sheer paranoia triggers a frantic, unscripted sprint into the pitch-black night. James Carr. At his absolute zenith, the hit, "The Dark End of the Street," completely silenced America, cementing his golden illusion as a deep soul powerhouse. Yet, the sudden drop occurred in a bustling Japanese arena in 1979. He didn't just forget a lyric, he fell to his knees mid-song, screaming in raw agony, "Don't hurt me anymore." Schizophrenia was his merciless foe. He constantly suffered the invisible punishment of terrifying hallucinations, once fleeing a tour blindly into the night driven by chilling speculation that unseen assassins were actively hunting him. The systemic blade of the industry swiftly terminated his contract, leaving his mind to quietly disintegrate in total isolation. Fame cannot protect a fragile soul unable to distinguish applause from a lethal threat. A frantic sprint to escape imaginary assassins simply delays the inevitable, but a complete surrender to the devil's whispers immediately transforms a frightened victim into a very real, blood-stained executioner. Little Willie John. Look closely at the pooling blood on a bar floor in 1964. It marks the exact epicenter of a horrifying sudden drop. Standing over the lifeless body wasn't a hardened criminal, but an R&B powerhouse whose hit Fever created a golden illusion that commanded even Elvis Presley's respect. Yet, beneath the dazzling stage lights, he was actively fighting a merciless foe of extreme, violent paranoia. His raw agony had already erupted publicly when he forcefully pushed his bandmates to the stage floor, screaming they were literal demons in disguise. Handcuffed and bound by the invisible punishment of a completely fractured mind, he was dragged into custody, chillingly humming a cheerful tune and smiling as if the corpse at his feet never existed. He offered only one chilling speculation to his stunned cellmate regarding the murder: "The devil made me do it." He ultimately died behind bars from a sudden heart attack, an unprotected genius utterly consumed by unseen monsters. The physical violence of a bloody knife attack is horrifyingly tangible, yet an entirely invisible psychological assassination occurs when phantom radio waves convince a gentle soul that federal agents are broadcasting directly inside his brain. Donny Hathaway. The pair of shoes resting neatly by the 15th floor hotel window was a chilling forensic detail. They marked the exact spot of the sudden drop. As a 1970s powerhouse, his love songs created a picture-perfect golden illusion. Yet, beneath the dazzling stage lights, schizophrenia became his merciless foe. The raw agony peaked when he abruptly abandoned a recording session with Roberta Flack, plagued by a chilling speculation that the CIA had implanted a listening device in his brain. The phantom voices were his invisible enemy. There was no lengthy suicide letter, just a fragmented note left in his pocket. "I can't take it anymore." Society's willful blindness to his invisible punishment forced him to take that final, fatal step. He didn't die of despair. He was hunted by ghosts no one else could see. Plummeting from a skyscraper permanently silences the mind's internal demons. Conversely, stepping through the front door of your own childhood home only to stare down the barrel of a father's gun violently redefines the very concept of sanctuary. Marvin Gaye. On April 1, 1984, the fatal bullet was fired by his own father. This devastating sudden drop concluded a life spent anticipating its own violent end. Before that gunshot, he was a soul powerhouse, spinning trauma into a golden illusion of brilliance. Yet, the dazzling stage lights couldn't erase the raw agony of childhood abuse and the invisible punishment of isolating fame. He became a walking phantom, wearing black on tour, declaring he had been dead for a long time. Staring into a television camera, he offered a chilling speculation: "I can no longer control my mind." Death simply closed a soul that had been torn for decades. A father pulling the trigger is a terrifying betrayal of blood, yet the ultimate tragedy of absolute power is when a cultural king realizes he cannot even trust his own reflection, barricading his fractured sanity inside a paranoid fortress. James Brown. He was the undeniable godfather of soul, a cultural icon, but a psychological ghost hijacked his mind long before his body failed. Behind the golden illusion of a powerhouse, a silent predator of extreme paranoia relentlessly stalked him. He suffered the invisible punishment of a mind that couldn't even trust itself. The sudden drop wasn't a single event, but a series of terrifying episodes, speeding down highways brandishing a gun, screaming that invisible enemies were actively reading his thoughts. He barricaded himself inside a hotel room for 3 grueling days, paralyzed by the chilling speculation that the FBI was setting traps. He famously declared to the press, "We are all puppets," a tragic testament to his raw agony. He died in total isolation, battling an unacknowledged mental illness. His soul had clearly perished, utterly devoured by the fear in his head, long before his physical heart finally stopped beating. Mental health spares no one, not even our brightest stars. If we genuinely love these powerhouse legends, we must stop judging their sudden drops and start choosing empathy. Sometimes, simply acknowledging their raw agony is enough to pull a fractured soul back from the unfillable void. Thank you for staying until the end, looking past the picture-perfect illusions to see the real human beings who sacrificed everything for the music. They need our understanding more than ever. Drop a comment, hit the like button if these stories moved you, and share this video to spread awareness.